President Trump is under fire for alleged foreign collusion with Ukraine and is now getting support in his defense from the last foreign leader he was accused of colluding with. Vladimir Putin defending Donald Trump's Ukraine call and echoing the Republican line that this is a, quote, pretext for Democrats. He's also trolling.
I'll tell you in a secret. Yes, we will definitely intervene. It's a secret, so that everybody can laugh, and so we'll go big. But don't tell anyone, please. Please don't tell anyone.
It would be tempting to let some of these foreign policy battles devolve just into rhetoric. Putin's stage whisper, Donald Trump's bluster and calls for collusion from all kinds of countries. The stakes are also high because great power politics are undergirded by many hard assets, from those U.S. nukes, currently apparently jeopardizing the Middle East after Trump's shift on Syria policy, to the international energy markets, which Russia both impacts and is vulnerable to. Russia treats oil as a resource and as a weapon and a point of national pride. Putin's aides, quote, believe their energy industry is about restoring Russian honor and deploying power and leverage in advancing Putin's foreign policy aims, as Rachel Maddow documents in her new book. And those aims include Ukraine, a state that Russia has at times pushed around, even cutting the nation's gas supply and then blaming that same country for Russia's actions, something that Maddow also documents, writing, quote, the infinitely corruptible energy business allowed Putin to pick and choose who would be rich and who would be powerful in Ukraine. When President Trump won, he appointed an oil executive, Rex Tillerson, who also was something of a Putin ally, to run the whole State Department, which really you could argue spent years struggling under the weight of what you might call very blatant Russian conflicts of interest, only to find his replacement now laboring under the weight of a new plot and a new set of conflicts of interest regarding Ukraine. It's a lot. But I think we're going to have help untangling it because Rachel Maddow is here right now. I'm joined by Rachel Maddow, host of The Rachel Maddow Show, right here on MSNBC. Her new book is Blowout, about how the oil and natural gas businesses can corrupt governments around the world. And we can announce right here, right now, it is again #1 on the New York Times bestseller list tonight. That's new and for the second week in a row.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That's brand new news.
News.
Yeah, it's really weird. It's awesome. I mean, it's weird. Mostly weird.
Thank you. Thank you for stopping by. You're doing a million things.
Sure.
Why is it important to understand oil and business as an agent of a foreign policy problem around the world?
I got interested in this topic in part because I was trying to figure out what was the motive force for why Russia attacked us the way they did in 2016. And where I got pretty quickly, to kind of make a long story short, is that they were desperate in ways that I didn't understand. Desperate, driven by their economy, which both sucks. It's a really small economy for a really big country. And it's really, really, really dependent on oil and gas. And their own oil and gas sector is terrible. So they were desperate to get U.S. sanctions dropped. I believe a lot of what they did in 2016 was about trying to get sanctions dropped. I think that's a lot of what they're still doing in terms of whatever influence they still do have. But a lot of that is just driven by the way that oil and gas warped their economy. Putin likes oil and gas being their main economic pillar because he wants to use oil and gas, as you were saying before the break, essentially as a weapon against other countries. But in so doing and making it basically an arm of his presidential office, he oversees an oil and gas industry in his country that's terrible at what they do. And it's really painted them into a corner. So they have very few other options other than to try to sort of sabotage and cheat their way to a new future.
I have a very big question that I think you're perfect to answer. And I know it touches on some reporting you've also been doing. Why does Russia always go when they have options? They always go to the button of, well, let's just try to change U.S. policy. Not every country does that, whether it's, we've done a lot on the meddling, but you're reporting as well on ideas of, well, let's just change who the ambassador is. Let's just change what the extradition outlook is. Why is that their go-to move? And should we be concerned that in the current era, they're good at it?
Well, it wasn't their go-to move before this administration. I mean, they never, before the Trump administration, I think, had an expectation that they would be able to wheedle what they wanted out of U.S. policy. Now it seems like they do. That's why I think the impeachment story about Trump right now is, at the one level, as you were just talking about with your previous guests, super simple. You can't go to another country for help against your opponents in the next election. Done. It's over. That's a crime. It's obviously impeachable, and the president has confessed to it, and he will be impeached for it. What's getting to be more interesting about this story, sort of above and beyond that, is who was helping cook up this scheme and for what. And the Giuliani factor here is interesting. His associates being arrested, Giuliani himself being under investigation, now reportedly under counterintelligence investigation. The guy who appears to have been paying Giuliani's associates who just got arrested is a Ukrainian natural gas billionaire who's connected to the Kremlin. To the extent that Russia has been, Russia sort of and their cutouts in all these places has been trying to get the U.S. to do stuff. With both a carrot approach and a stick approach, it seems like this impeachment scandal was part of it.
When you look at where the Congress seems to be headed on impeachment, and you track these stories, and a lot of people, myself included, wait to see you make sense of it at night. Do you see this as a story with a deadline? Because a lot of political stories have a kind of an endless contested quality, which is why I think some people in the country get very tired of parts of politics, particularly in Washington. Does this have a deadline because 2020 at a certain point begins and Speaker Pelosi either moves or doesn't? Or because Ukraine itself became a thing that was justified by new facts or new reports, it could still pop up in the middle of a presidential campaign?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. And now that we're starting to see arrests, now that we're starting to see at least part of the Justice Department, Southern District of New York involved here, and this has some criminal elements to it and some prosecutorial elements to it, that puts a kind of different spin on whether or not we think this stuff has a timeline. I mean, number one, it means that statutes of limitations are implicated. It also means that we could sort of watch things on court deadlines and we can expect things to unfold on the timeline of prosecutors and the New York courts and the New York federal court system. But in terms of the impeachment stuff, I have heard, that Nancy Pelosi wants this done by the end of the year. I think that makes sense given the initial accusations against the president for which he's being impeached. But if this becomes a bigger thing, if this spells out into a major counterintelligence matter, which it's starting to look like it might, well, maybe that means the investigation and the proceedings against the president here might take longer. I don't know. I tend to think that Nancy Pelosi has good political instincts on these things, but I don't know what those arguments are like within the Democratic caucus based on what they're finding out. I mean, it'll be fascinating to see what's in all these depositions when they finally come out.
Yeah, you also talk to a lot of these individuals from the presidential debates to the interviews you do.
Yeah.
Do you think Congressman Schiff is better at this than other people, and that's why he's out in the helm? Because, we heard a lot about an umbrella. We heard a lot about multiple committees. Congress gets back to town after, as you say, these blockbuster depositions, and we see the speaker and the Intel chair, and that's it.
And we see the Intel chairman giving a press conference and the Speaker of the House sitting in the audience at his press conference listening to him do it. You never see that in Washington, right? I mean, I was going to ask you about this, Ari, in terms of what you think is going to happen with these depositions. I mean, they're all happening behind closed doors. We are getting a little bit of leak, a little bit of description, a little bit of reporting as to what's happening in those depositions, but they're basically still very much under wraps. We know that there's a stated intention that they're going to release these depositions, scrubbed versions of these depositions ultimately. But what do you think the end product here is going to be? Do you think that Schiff is going to put something together that's like the Watergate roadmap, where, they cited to all of the grand jury testimony of all of the different witnesses and laid it out and said, this is what the basis of the impeachment articles should be. Except in this case, it won't be grand jury testimony. It'll be these depositions. Or do you think they're just going to release all this stuff all at once? I mean, what do you think they're going to do with it?
Well, that's the big question, right? I think what people get confused about is we talk so much about fairness, and under the Constitution, the Senate is supposed to provide this fair process. That's not the House's job.
Yeah.
The House is supposed to decide whether something's bad enough to charge and to act like prosecutors. And so I think to your question, it is, do they decide that if there's 0 articles of impeachment, they explain and move on. That's like a declination. But if they're charging, do they come out with 1, 2, 5 articles? I mean, Johnson started out with 11 articles, and then release evidence to support their case. Because the public opinion is already moving just from a kind of hey, we heard this. Did you hear Giuliani's a walking hand grenade?
I know.
And the public opinion is moving. Do you have people come out and do it as charges?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I can imagine here. I mean, we've all seen the Watergate roadmap, right? So that actually wasn't released publicly until this past year. And thank God that it was. But you could see the Watergate special prosecutor, the second one at that point, it's Jaworski, right? Because Archibald Cox got fired in the Saturday Night Massacre. Jaworski's there. He goes through all the grand jury testimony from all the witnesses and just lays it out, just the facts. Here's the criminal acts, and here's the basis that we have for asserting that these appear to have been criminal acts. And that becomes the basis for the impeachment articles, which by the time they're actually drawn up in the House, it's an insurmountable barrier for President Nixon. I mean, I'm assuming that's where Schiff is going here. But he's also said he's going to release the full depositions. So,
right, which then allows people to cherry pick.
Yeah, and if this is now happening alongside an active counterintelligence investigation as to whether or not this scheme was a foreign influence operation, which is reportedly what SDNY is looking at this from the Giuliani side, well, that's also going to be an interesting thing in terms of how those two things dovetail.
Because we keep an eye on your work, before I let you go, we did take just a couple moments from the full decade history of the Rachel Maddow Show.
What?
Your first show, your interview with Barack Obama and you in Iraq, because that's striking to me as someone who's learned from you and obviously looks up to you. I've said that before, it's not a secret, to think about the evolution in the reporting you do, which I would love to get your thoughts on the other side of a little bit of Rachel Maddow at work.
Wow. Thanks, man.
Welcome to the Rachel Maddow Show here on MSNBC. We are very excited about the new show.
And I think there are a lot of Republican voters out there, self-identified, who actually think that what the Bush administration has done has been damaging to the country.
We are coming to you live tonight from a U.S. military base inside the International Zone, a.k.a. the Green Zone here in Baghdad.
How is your job different now? What do you do more or less of?
I clearly I'm not doing a better job with my hair. Just kind of over time, 12 years of basically the same haircut, looking better or worse, depending on the humidity. Wow. It's an incredible privilege to have a job where what you're paid to do is read the news, report, talk to people, and explain what you think is important. And that remains the core of what we do every day. This thing that we're in the middle of right now for this past 3 years or so, not just about the foreign influence on the 2016 election, not just about this impeachment crisis, but everything in between, I feel like has sort of tested all of our abilities to stay up on what matters, to keep all the dots in your head so that you can see when they do connect. But the basic rules are the same. Try to increase the amount of useful information in the world. Try to make sure you've read everything. And when it comes time to talk and say what is most important, that you've got a good sense of how these things fit into context.
Well, if you have to make sure you've read everything, I'll just say on behalf of the beat, start right here with Blowout. A lot of other people are. It's number one. Rachel,
thank you
thanks
so
for
much,
making time. You're doing a million things. I really appreciate it. Rachel Maddow, again, the book, Blowout. You can get it wherever books are sold. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.